for May 27, 2020 to order. It's 6:20 p.m. We had some technical difficulties with YouTube this evening, and so we are broadcasting on Provo Channel 17 on Facebook. We'll be taking public comments this evening as well. And there are two options. May 27, 2020 to an online form. May 27, 2020 to order. It's 6:20 p.m. And the second option is a call-in. And we just ask that you mute or silence any external audio on your end to reduce feedback if you call in. We'll be posting the exact directions on how to call in or submit an online form during the hearing. So just stay tuned and watch the screen, and that will be posted by our Development Services Department. All right, then. We have actually 3 items we'll be hearing this evening. There were 5, but item 3 and 4 originally scheduled have been continued. 2 of the items this evening are marked with asterisks. Those are legislative in nature, and we'll be making recommendations to Municipal Council on those items. The first item is administrative, and the Planning Commissioners will be making a decision on that item. So before we go any farther, I'll ask each of the commissioners to state their name and whether they have a conflict of interest with any items on the agenda this evening. And we'll start with Ms. Jensen.
Lisa Jensen, and I don't have any conflicts.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Dave Anderson, no conflicts.
Thank you. Mr. Knudsen?
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Thank you. Ms. Urquiaga?
Laurie Urquiaga, no conflicts.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
No conflicts.
And I'm Deborah Jensen, and I have no conflicts. Right, so we will start with item 1 for this evening. Item 1, QRVE Investments LLC requests a conditional use permit for a private school located at 890 East Quail Valley Drive in the Professional Office or PO Zone. This is in the Edgemont neighborhood, and Mr. Wright will present item 1 this evening.
All right, thank you. So just to clarify again, that address you read was correct. The address in the staff report in item 1 was missing the 8, so it is 890 East. I just wanted to note that.
Thank you.
So this property, as you can see here, is one that has been before the Planning Commission before. Earlier this year, there was a school approved for a business license for the school to go there. At that time, it was believed to be a school that was a charter school that can go in any zone, and so that was approved. Later, it came to the city's attention that it's a private school and it's subject to having permitted or conditional uses within that zone. And so at that time in the professional office zone, that SLU, Standard Land Use Code, wasn't in there. And so earlier this year, staff initiated a ordinance text amendment to add that land use into the professional office or PO zone. So the Planning Commission recommended approval on that ordinance amendment. It went to the City Council and they adopted it. So currently in the professional office zone that we have that use as a conditional use now. And so the applicant is just following up with that with this application to get that conditional use approved. And so they've submitted their application and staff has reviewed it. Staff has reviewed the parking and the drop-off pickup area and the queuing that goes on there. The parking requirement is 1 or 3 stalls per room used in the school. There's 8 rooms, so they have a parking requirement of 24 parking stalls. There's 30 stalls on site, so they have sufficient parking to meet the code requirements. They have 420 feet of queuing space on their site, so off street to be able to drop off and pick up students. And so staff feels comfortable that this use will be able to fit into this area within this zone with some conditions. Staff's conditions are that the provisions in 1434-520, the Provo City Code, will be continuously complied with by the applicant, and that if there's any future expansion of the building, as far as more rooms, or if there's grades that are taught, such as high school level, that there would have to be a new parking plan approved by the city. So that's my report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those now.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Wright?
Just a quick question from Andrew Howard. Other than the fact that it's private versus charter, the application is substantially the same as it was last time. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's going to be a school. It's going to be used as it has been to this point. So,
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, if there are no other questions from the commissioners, I'll turn this over to the applicant. And I'm sorry, I don't have a name of the applicant on this staff report.
Ms. Jensen, it's Corbin Church.
Great, thank you, Mr. Church.
Yes, thank you for giving me a moment of your time tonight. I have my camera turned off because COVID's allowed me the luxury of not having to shave, and I'm not as distinguished looking as Mr. Howard. So I'm just going to hide behind no camera tonight. Thank you for a moment of your time. This item came before you a little over a year ago. I was seeking, there's a half acre of property to the west of this building. I was seeking to put a fourplex on that property. I received unanimous approval to recommend to the city council from the planning commission. But when we got to planning commission, there was a tremendous amount of conflict in regards to this, a lot of heartache, and I ended up walking away. I chose to not go forward. At this point, I've taken that property and I've given it to my tenant to be used for additional parking, for additional ingress or improved ingress egress from the property to make it better. They've been functioning as a school for the full school year. They'll come back in the fall. I have a 10-year lease with them with 2 5-year renewals. They're an excellent tenant in the area. This property is a hotbed of contention. The neighbors do not like this property. As Mr. Howard nods his head, he's seen many things come from this property over the years. And I just have to say that the neighbors can comment otherwise if I'm mistakenly quoting them or saying something wrong, but they're pleased with this use for the building. Directly to the west of this building is the LDS Seminary for Timpview High School, and directly west of the LDS Seminary is Timpview High School. These animals now match up. It makes sense that this be an educational facility. And so it's been functioning as such. This is more of dotting some I's and crossing some T's with the city to get a conditional use permit in place so that the school can exist there. It's named Slope Schools, and they have some room to grow with the property that I've added into their lease, and which was going to be the fourplex, which I had proposed before. So I don't have anything else to share with you tonight. Mr. Wright has explained it well, and I think that this is, that's all I have to share with you. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Church?
Mr. Church, have you, I'm assuming that you've had some neighborhood meetings. How recently was the most recent one that you did?
Great question. And I'm going to call you Ms. Lori, if you don't mind.
That's
Okay.
fine.
I can see your last name, but and I heard it pronounced earlier.
It scares away telemarketers. That's why.
Okay, I'm going to change my last name. We had a number of meetings last year, I would say probably 4 to 6. They were fairly contentious. They were heated. They weren't, they've been civil, but people were very opposed to the fourplex that I was proposing. When Mr. Wright put this out to the neighborhood chairs to hold a neighborhood meeting in regards to this proposal, the neighborhood chairs came back and said that the neighbors weren't interested. They didn't give an explanation, I'm assuming, because they don't have opposition, but please understand that is an assumption on my behalf. They were pretty eager to meet before, and this time they didn't care to. That's my assumption.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Church?
I'll go ahead and remute myself.
Deborah, did you hear Robert's question?
No, we did not hear that.
Put that everywhere.
Sorry, it was
Mr.
muted.
Knudsen?
I was just wondering to Mr. Church that if the student body should continue to grow and should get larger and larger and they need more spaces, parking spaces, is he willing to let that ground that's now empty be made into parking stalls?
Yes, Mr. Knudsen, that ground has been given to the school to use as they desire. So recently they graded it and put grass in. So they're using it as playground, and that is room for them to, as they grow the school, which they have plans to do so, they'll use that for parking and additional access so the cars don't queue up along Quail Valley. There is no intention going forward for that to be used for low density residential, which was my original plan. It's just now going to be part of the school and the office building as it sits for the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Church, commissioners?
I don't understand where this additional property is that he's referring to.
Perhaps
Is it part of the parcel, the triangular parcel, or is it the same one that's in the staff report?
Mr. Wright, would you like me to put that up on the screen?
Yeah, if you'd like to point out, I've got it pulled up here. I think you can tell them where that is.
Okay, would you like to share your screen?
It should be, let's see.
The vacant land to the west.
Yeah, there
Okay,
you go.
so,
It's-
so
you go.
bigger than what was originally shown in the staff report. We're now talking about that brown area being included in your request.
Well, that property is already zoned PU. That property, we're not asking for anything there. We're asking for a conditional use permit for the use of the building that you see, the big white odd-shaped building, for that to be used as a school in a professional office zone. But all that property to the west of the driveway, the left side of the screen that's brown where the arrow is pointing,
Yes.
that area now can be used for additional parking, additional playground, or additional ingress, egress for queuing up of cars. Yes.
Okay. I understood that your conditional use permit was for the building, but if the issues were with ingress, egress, queuing, parking, whatever, it's good to know that that's yours also.
Yes.
So thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes, indeed.
Any other questions, commissioners?
I'm noticing on the slide that it says that the 7 secondary stalls are vacant during drop off and pickup. Is that managed in any way, or do people just know not to use them?
I know you're looking for a response from me. Sorry, I'm trying to increase my screen size so I can see what you're talking about. My apologies.
It's just, so there's that loop and you've got some primary, it's those where the arrow is now,
Yes.
the secondary stalls, where it says that they're going to be vacant. I'm assuming that's so that cars have a nice turn radius that they can move through.
That's correct.
Is that going to be managed in any way, or are people just expected to know not to use them?
No, it's a great question. On the south southwest corner of the building. There is a fence from the southwest corner of the building over to where you see the cars parked, right there. There's a fence that goes along there that is operable. And so they close that fence off during the day. They have more parking than they need. And so they use that upper area for hard surface playground. And so during drop off and pick up, the gate is opened up to allow parents to make the radius turn to get in and out.
Oh, thank you. That's helpful to know.
Gladly.
Any other questions, Commissioner? All right, if there are no further questions from the commissioners for Mr. Church, then I will open this item 1 up to public comment. First of all, is the neighborhood chair from Edgemont neighborhood on the line or making any comments?
I have not received any written comments for item number 1 yet.
Okay. Do you want to give it a few minutes?
Yeah, let's give it a minute. I'm not sure how long of a lag we have with the Facebook Live.
I'll let you act as our official timer. And I'll just note that per the staff report for item 1, the neighborhood chair determined that a neighborhood meeting was not needed for this application. So that may be why we don't have anyone calling in or commenting at this time.
No callers.
Sharon Mehmet just commented on Facebook saying she doesn't think that Marion is listening. I don't know if that's useful to know.
Yeah, we have no comments at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will close item 1 to public comment then and turn it back to the commissioners for any further discussion, questions.
Madam Chair, this is Andrew Howard.
Mr. Howard?
This has come up multiple times, and I must say that Corbin Church has brought this property into alignment with the neighboring property and better alignment with the facilities that are actually there. I think we had a long debate as this property has transitioned from a proposed residential unit to actually in the school setting, which is compatible and comports to the surrounding functions. And so I think that's why the public comments have tapered off. I think it's a very compatible use. I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Any other comments or questions?
I have a few.
Ms. Jensen.
So the neighbors were already concerned at the last meeting when we talked about the zoning, about the drop off and the pickup queues. Some of them said they'd watched and they felt like it was pouring out on into the street. Is that a legitimate traffic concern, or is the 420 foot of queuing space enough that they can manage it well, like that was in the traffic report? I just want to make sure we're not discounting that as a concern.
I'm sorry. Mr. Day, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yes, as we've looked at this, we feel like the ability for the street to handle that pickup and drop off is, as well as the parking lot, is sufficient for what they're going to do there. It's much less intense than you would see at the high school when school starts. So you wouldn't even notice a difference with this use.
Excellent. I have two other questions.
Please.
They mentioned that they could expand up to 65 students with more grades offered. So about the parking lot again, some of these students could drive their own cars. So is that something we should be concerned about, or how do we regulate that as a possible growth without just putting it on the neighbors to complain that things have changed?
I think that's a question for Mr. Wright.
Yeah, so with regard to that, in the staff recommendation, we have a condition there that says if there's future expansion of the grades taught, the number of rooms, that they'd have to come back and show us how they're going to be able to accommodate that type of growth and still meet the parking requirements and have adequate circulation for queuing like they do now. So that's that was something that we wanted to make sure was addressed and put into a condition as part of this conditional use permit.
Okay, I interpreted that to mean that if they expanded physically, like if they added on to the school instead of if they added more students. So I thought that would be harder to regulate if they had more enrollment. Like, do we want to say what that means? Like 3 more students, 10 more students, significant? Like, how do we define that so they know when they need to report to us again?
Yeah, so as far as parking requirements go, for elementary through middle school, the parking is 3 stalls per room. So if they do physical addition onto the building to add more rooms, then there would have to be some additional parking there. If they just add more elementary age students, then that wouldn't necessarily trigger any type of parking requirement increase as far as our code goes. If
Right.
they expand the high school students, then the code changes and it says that they have to have, I believe it's 1 space per 4 high school students. So again, if they do any type of grade change to high school age, they're going to have to show that they can meet those additional parking requirements to meet the city.
Okay. But once again, is there something legal that would require them to check back with us before they do that? Or that would just automatically take them out of compliance with their conditional use permit because they have a different age group and that would require them to come back just by default?
Yeah, if they were to operate outside of what they've been approved at,
Okay.
then they would be in violation and the city could then.
Okay. So this is specifically being approved for the age group that they're asking. All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Anyone care to make a motion on item 1?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Mr. Howard?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the request for a conditional use permit for a private school located at 890 East Quail Valley Drive in the professional office zone, subject to provisions in 14.34.520 of the Provo City Code, that they shall be continually complied with, and that any future expansion of grades taught or number of rooms that would impact parking would need a new parking plan to be approved by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Do we have a second for Mr. Howard's motion on item 1?
I second the motion. It's Dave.
Seconded by Mr. Anderson. All those in favor of approving the motion stated by Mr. Howard and seconded by Mr. Anderson? Ms. Jensen?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Knudsen?
Go again.
Mr. Knudsen?
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Urquiaga?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
And myself, I'll vote aye as well. So that's unanimous. Item 1 is approved.
Thank you all for your time this evening. Best wishes.
Nice job.
Welcome, Mr. Church. All right, item 2 is legislative. We'll be making a recommendation to Municipal Council on item 2. The Provo Municipal Council requests an ordinance text amendment to add the very low density residential or VLDR zone to the Provo City Code as chapter 14.14F. This would have citywide application, and Mr. Weaver will present item 2.
All right. So Community and Neighborhood Services Department has been requested by the Provo Municipal Council to propose a new zone to the code, the very low density residential zone 14.14F. Currently, there's no development that is coinciding with this zone. It's purely a new zone. Some of the differences between this zone and the LDR zone, just to give a little clarification, is that the LDR zone allows for up to 15 units per acre, and the VLDR zone allows for up to 7 units per acre. Another difference is that the VLDR, we are going to require amenities for it if there are 10 units or more. With the LDR, we require that after 20. So there's a couple of the differences with it. Primarily, this zone is going to act as a potentially as a buffer between a R1 zone and a LDR zone. So you could potentially have this VLDR zone between the two. I don't think so. The other difference, the other thing with this is that the VLDR zone will require all developments to be to follow the residential design guidelines standards. So in the end, you're going to have a higher quality of product. Otherwise, that is primarily. Are there any questions? Staff has not received any public comments on this or neighborhood chair input, other than one minor question that was addressed already before this meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Commissioners, any questions on item 2 for Mr. Weaver?
I have one.
You beat
Go
me.
ahead.
Mr. Howard.
I was just going to ask, is this the kind of zone that would be conducive to a pocket neighborhood sort of thing? I think that would be good.
Potentially, yes. Potentially, but in addition to that, pocket neighborhoods require the size of the lot to be, well, if we're talking an R1 zone, they have to be a certain dimension for square footage, I believe, for a home. And I'm not sure if we have defined that for this VLDR. So I'm not 100% sure if this would work for a pocket neighborhood.
Is there something in mind for this particular zone?
Not to my knowledge as of yet.
Thank you.
Is it my turn?
Yes, Ms. Jensen, thank you.
Okay, so my question is mostly, I know that you guys have done a lot of work to clean up the ordinance, the city ordinances lately. And so mine is more of a, how is this going to be received by the public? Because it's not actually very low density as far as low as you can go. And so I feel like it's confusing to call it very low density if it's not actually single family in the traditional understanding of single family. It's almost like it needs to say this is a mid-range density under the classification of very low mid-range density or something, because there's still all those single family zones that are below this. Does that make sense? This one's based on acreage also, but the wording makes it sound like it should be R18 or R110 when in fact it's R17.
There are some similarities to this as being similar to the R16 zone. However, this allows for different types of development, rather single family detached, single family, attached, and duplexes
Right.
to the neighborhood, which does align with the general plan to have a variety of housing types within neighborhoods. This could
Right.
also work to have these variety of housing types like spread throughout the community on smaller lots of land within each neighborhood.
Right. And I don't disagree with that intention at all. I just was worried that the language, unless you work in the planning office, is it going to be confusing to have these acreage and occupancy differences that have a lot of similarities as well? There's a lot of overlap there, and I'm just not sure that the general public will understand that very low density residential doesn't mean what they think it means.
Yeah, I think it's common that there's misunderstanding in the public because city planning is so technical and the jargon is so unique to
Right.
planning. You know, we already have an LDR zone that's 15 units to the acre. Most people would say exactly what you're saying, that when you think of low density, you don't think of 15 units to the acre. But that's
Right.
why the city council wanted another zone that was lower than that. And by calling it VLDR, it simply follows the nomenclature that we've got with the LDR, MDR, and HDR.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't feel like that was going to create a problem. If it's a problem that's already happening and you're comfortable with it, then it seems like it's probably fine. That's all.
If I can maybe jump on that, I think Commissioner Jensen has a great point. And I think that the language that's used to describe a bunch of different things in Provo's zoning code is not very intuitive. I think it ends up having kind of a technical feel to it and different things like that. That's really not necessary. I think it's not probably appropriate now to ask for this to be changed, but there's no reason for descriptions of zoning districts and different things like that to be as difficult to follow in terms of the format and how they're described, how they're titled. And like Bill said, the nomenclature and different things like that, it could be much more straightforward, much more simple, and easy for somebody that might only tune into one issue in their life, you know, relative to a public hearing or a zoning question or different things like that to understand without being alienated by the way things are just being described or otherwise just kind of the nature of the discussion. I'd love to see us spend some time, you know, without changing any of the text of the zones, but just describing them in a more uniform and straightforward way. I think that'd be very worthwhile.
And that's something that we can definitely do at a future time. I agree with that. The zone text was taken from our LDR, MDR, HDR zone, so there's similar jargon within all those zones. So what would need to happen is kind of a cleanup of some other additional zones when the time comes.
Yeah, I think it might honestly just kind of be start to finish, just kind of taking a different approach to naming the different zoning districts.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson, I think that you just highlighted one more reason why we need Planning Commission to do things like this rather than administrative things. So we'll put that one on the list.
Oh boy.
Although, Robert, if we didn't have things like this on the agenda that we were seeing, we wouldn't find all the problems. So it's a catch-22.
Oh, I promise we can bring you problems. Don't you worry.
Is that a threat or a promise?
A promise.
It's
We
like
need your help.
Well, and there's no way around having this on a planning commission agenda, you know,
Right.
a text amendment to the zoning code. This is not something that could be made just administrative, delegated to staff or anything like that.
Right. I think just the larger conversation about how we can improve our zoning code and make it more accessible, more user-friendly, and more readable and understandable. I think that's a great thing that we can hopefully accomplish.
And I'll just add, it's not a Provo problem. I think it's
Right.
it's an industry professional problem that a lot of us deal with and a lot of us could do a better job with.
But this is
It might make things easier in the long run too, because you've got neighbors who see, oh, this is going to be zoned very low density residential. They don't have any concerns with that because that sounds like something they really value. And then they find out that that doesn't mean what they think it means. And so that uninformed participant missed out on their opportunity to have their voice heard.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for staff, commissioners?
Maybe just relative to the geography, and I think Andrew might have touched on this. As staff, do you guys have any ideas as to maybe what kinds of situations specifically this would be used in? Any parts of town? Anything? Yeah, maybe not. Just as an example.
I think that this is a situation that Mr. Howard mentioned, possibly a pocket neighborhood. That might be a situation where this would be used. I think the intention is to create a zone that would allow a situation where you could kind of mix those residential uses a little bit easier than a traditional, R18 or R17 residential zone, but would also limit the density a little bit. I think that was the intention of council, that they're often uncomfortable with the entitlement that LDR can provide, because that's 15 units to the acre.
Yeah.
So they like the flexibility of those types of zones with the different land uses and the design standards as well, and the open space and amenity standards. But they just wanted something that would not allow such a high density in that case. And so I think that there are areas of our city, especially as infill development might come in some of these RC zones, and different established areas of our town that might redevelop in a way. I think this might be a zone that could be utilized well there.
Okay, speaking hypothetically, and not applying to any particular property, but with a recent discussion in mind, there was a property along Northern University Avenue a couple of months ago. Is this the kind of zoning that you would think of applying in that sort of a situation?
This would probably be a little bit more residential in nature than somewhere like that. I'm not entirely sure which one you're talking about, Laurie, but
it was near the veterinary clinic, if that brings it to mind.
Yeah. I think that this is a situation that could probably be utilized there. Yeah.
Okay, that's only hypothetical, like not specifically applying to that, but as an example.
I think that is a good example, actually.
And Laurie, another thing is, if, let's just pretend, hypothetical again, you have R110, you have a large lot next to them, and then you have an LDR zone that already is built up. With this zone, let's just say it's a couple acres, and they put the VLDR zone there. Part of the zone allows, they have more than 10 units, so then they have to have the amenity space, and part of that has to be kind of grouped together. If it's like a landscaped area for with pavilions and other things that the residents can use, that could potentially be next to the R110, between that and the VLDR structure, to add as even an additional kind of buffer with it.
Yeah, we kind of see this as a little bit of a transitional zone,
Thank you.
to a bit more high density, but nothing like an R110 type of situation. We see this as something that could transition different neighborhoods into the higher density uses. So I think there are a lot of applications. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
So is this a residential or a zoning code that you would anticipate someone would try to rezone, lower zoning to this zoning moving forward? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure what you mean by lower zoning.
For example, if it was an R18 and this property sitting next to an R18, which also used to be R18. Let's say it's R18 and somebody wants to build something more dense,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just having the option of R18 or R16 or LDR. This gives them something lower that is more of a transition. So you don't end up, I guess what I'm going back to is thinking about the fact that the project Lori was speaking about earlier juxtaposed LDR against low density single family housing, and it can be an abrupt change.
Yeah, and
15 units per acre can seem like quite a change.
And this could act as a really good, again, buffer between it and possibly facilitate that need that we don't necessarily have.
Right.
And also the need, with neighbors and residents having this concern of, oh, they could have up to 15. They may not. They can only do 8, but they still could go up to 15. It keeps, they feel more assured by the zone of not allowing that higher number.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments, commissioners? Is anyone from Municipal Council wishing to address this tonight as the applicant? Or I guess Community and Neighborhood Services is actually the applicant.
Correct. We just did it on behalf of the council.
All right.
they'll have plenty of time at council.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, then I will open up item 2 to public comment at this time. And again, we'll have instructions on how the public can participate if they have any questions or comments on item 2. Should be appearing on the screen in just a moment. And if you will let us know if we have any comments and maybe monitor the time for us, that would be great.
We have one person on the phone with a comment, according to the Facebook messages.
Is Miss Law feeding the field?
I don't see any raised hands. Okay, there we go. Caller 438, go ahead.
Hi, this is Sharon Mehmet from the Edgemont neighborhood. I just wanted to add my comment to, I appreciate what you're saying about this maybe not appearing as very low density as it, as very low density sounds. It was kind of born out of some of the projects that have come before neighborhoods recently being a little higher in density than just an R1 zone, and so the change was being requested as an LDR, and so our heartburn arises out of if that zone change is approved, even if the developer walks away, now that zoning, we're left, as you mentioned, with possible infill projects that could be as dense as 15 units per acre, and so that's where this was kind of born out of. We would have a little less heartburn possibly, knowing that the maximum they could be given would be 7 units per acre. There are still going to be places where that will feel too dense, but I guess as projects come up, then they'll be reviewed individually for that zone change. But I appreciate what staff has done to bring this to this point, and maybe it needs a little more work to make that more clear to the public, but I appreciate the open space that's been written into it and some of the other things that staff has included to help that process along.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Mehmet. Did we have any other comments?
Okay, I don't have any written comments, but there is about a 30-second lag with the Facebook Live, so let's give it about 30 seconds.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we don't have any other public comments.
Great, thank you. All right, we will close item 2 to public comment at this time, and I will turn it back over to the commissioners for further discussion, questions, or motions. Ms. Urquiaga?
I think it sounds like a good option to add another level of transition with single family homes to something a little bit more dense. I felt like we needed something like this a couple of months ago.
Any other comments, commissioners? And I'll just say that I agree with the earlier comments about the categories. Maybe the naming of the categories are a little problematic and could be addressed in the future. But having said that, I think that introducing this particular zone does provide a better transition potentially between low density single family housing and a little bit higher density. It also opens up the possibility of some of the other housing typologies that we've expressed a need for in the general plan, such as duplex homes and low density townhomes. And I think the open space requirement, if a project is of a certain size, is positive as well.
Madam Chair, you ready for a motion?
Mr. Anderson, yes, please.
I move that we recommend that the Provo Municipal Council approve the proposed ordinance text amendment to add the very low density residential zone to the Provo City Code.
As chapter 14.14F.
Yes, just like that.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do we have a
I'll
second?
second that.
Seconded by, was that Ms. Jensen?
Yes, sorry, I overspoke.
Okay, thank you. All right, all those in favor of a positive recommendation to Municipal Council on item 2. And I'll read through the roll call again. Ms. Jensen?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Knudsen?
Aye.
Ms. Urquiaga?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
And myself, Ms. Jensen, aye. So that's unanimous. We'll send a positive recommendation to Municipal Council on item 2. Okay, again, items 3 and 4 originally on the agenda were continued, so we'll proceed to item 5. Item 5 is again legislative. We'll be making a recommendation to Municipal Council. Chris Ensign requests a zone change from residential agricultural RA and A 1.5 to R 1.7 for property located at approximately 901 West 1560 South in the Lakewood neighborhood. And Mr. Maxfield will present item 5.
Thank you. Let's see, let me get the. Sorry, we got to go down. There we are. Okay, just to orient you, am I on? Make sure I've got my microphone there. I'm good, okay?
You are good.
Great. Okay, here on this map, this shows the current zoning in the area, but just to orient you, we've got I-15 on the right side of the project. You got Lakeview Parkway at the bottom, and then 1560 South joining between 1100 West over to 500 West that goes down through this area. Herons Landing is in an area that the north half is currently zoned in the RA, residential agricultural, where the south is in the A15 zone, which is a 5-acre minimum lot size in an ag setting. The general plan for this area is basically the recently adopted Southwest Area Land Use Plan. And this shows that same orientation with the designations of the land use. And you can see this is residential. On the former general plan, it was also residential. It's always been the intention that everything that's more or less north of the Lakeview Parkway area become residential eventually, with the area south of that remaining somewhat more protected. The Osprey Subdivision is also shown there to the east, just to orient you. It's not filled in totally from when this air photo was taken, but that is entirely built out. I think there may be a couple of vacant lots actually on the south end, somewhere in that area. And then this is a proposed Herons Landing project. Again, here's Osprey on the right. You can see how that lays out. Herons Landing would be here south of 1560 South and extend down to the Lakeview Parkway. It's a gridded layout. It does include in the zoning the home that's here in the middle, an acre area. That's the owner of the property wanted to maintain his 1 acre site. But then it goes around through that area. You can see from the concept plan, the road is to eventually connect over to Osprey, both in the middle and on the southern side, and then a stub to the west that would connect eventually over to 1100 West. The concept plan's been slightly updated. I apologize, I'm not sure it even shows up. Maybe I can show, just as engineering's looked at the concept plan, there's actually detention basin that'd be required in the southeastern lot. There's a little blue spot that was kind of left over. We are having the applicant, as they develop this, had become part of one of the other lots, so you don't have a little HOA problem there in the middle of the subdivision, and kind of avoids a double fronted lot that way too, at least for the lot to the north. Overall, there are about 53 lots. The densities in the southwest area work out to 4.0 net acres. That was kind of instituted with the southwest area plan rather than a gross density. And so the applicant has met that density requirement with that number of lots. I think there's 18 and a half acres. I don't have my plan in front of me, but somewhere around that area. We've had a lot of comments on this site, and some of the comments dealing even with whether attending a neighborhood meeting. We'll let the applicant and the neighborhood chair address those. Then there have been some other things about what would happen as this area develops. One of the problems you've got in the southwest area is you've got a lot of land, most of the land that's still undeveloped in the city, is in that southwest area. Development in that area has been held up for quite some time, not because there's a problem with the sewer. And some people, I think, heard there was a sewer problem. Sewer is fine. It's the capacity in the sewer that wasn't there. And we had to establish what that capacity was to see if it was sufficient enough to handle these subdivisions. So these have been held up for a couple of years while that was answered. Currently, the city is looking to rebuild the sewage treatment plant and then eventually put another trunk line that goes through kind of between where Home Depot is and the main part of the mall. There's a sleeve under the freeway there, and it would come down through that area and basically double the capacity on that west side, duplicate the 32-inch line that's there now. That's still a number of years off. We do have regulations that allow only 40 lots to be developed in each phase. And an additional phase cannot be applied for until I believe it's 50% occupancy occurs on those first 40 lots. So the initial phase for this would be limited to 40 lots. Obviously, with these subdivisions, they don't build out overnight. It would take some time. This area will require quite a bit of fill on the south end. You have up to a 5-foot difference in the elevation there that they have to bring up to make the sewer work, and as well as the first floor, the habitable floor, has to be a foot above the flood elevation. And so there would be, quite a bit of fill that have to be brought in. Osprey had a little bit more leeway in the sense that even though they brought in a lot, they go down on their southern end is kind of where the dike was built in 1983. And the dike, in fact, is the west side of Osprey and that south side. The floodplain comes into play. It's been studied. The height of that area, I think the most comparable would probably be Lakeview Parkway, is about that height that it'd be built to. So eventually everything would be relatively flat through there. And it's one that it's impossible really to make people participate in a situation. Certainly it'd be better if this whole area developed at once. There's no doubt about that. But being as there's no way to force people to do that, and it is also the city policy to protect those that want to continue farming, to allow them to farm until such time as they are ready to develop. And so for that reason, these aren't right next to each other as they do develop. It's online, I hope he is. But anyway, I'll just turn over, Deborah, if you've got any questions.
Great, thank you. Before I ask the commissioners for questions, I just want to mention that the commissioners have received several emails and letters from the public, and those were shared by community development. So we've all had an opportunity to review those in advance of this hearing, just to assure the public that we have read their comments that have been submitted in advance. And then I'll ask commissioners if you have any questions for Mr. Maxfield.
I have some questions. Or Lisa,
Mr. Kiaga.
Okay, two questions. One is, what is the elevation of the neighborhood to the north of 1560 South relative to what this is going to be?
It's probably a little bit higher. The elevations, can you see the mouse on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. As I recall, and maybe David Day has something he can comment on, but the elevations actually come down below the property, the build-to height. And so as you go north, the elevation actually increases, not greatly, but it's enough that it pulls out of there. So the resulting elevation for Herons Landing will probably be a little bit lower as you go, well, a little bit lower than the northern areas.
Than the one above it. Okay. And then one of the letters that we got talked about birds nesting in this area. And I'm just kind of curious. I'm assuming this is not an official wetland. And are there any restrictions based on waterfowl or anything like that?
There are some existing areas, and it's been, I don't know if David Day even has the information, but they're toward the southwest of the corner there at the 1100 West and the Parkway, and then also in this commercial area is the greatest area that of more of a floodplain. I'm not sure that it's fully designated as wetland or not. There's been a lot of work going on with the Corps of Engineers through this area, reevaluating areas. A lot has changed because of the dike and also overall the elevations of the lake, which because of other improvements isn't as flood prone, believe it or not, as it was back in '83. So anyway, through those evaluations, those have to be taken care of. However, none of those are designated for any sanctuary type of areas. I believe that what we're looking at is everything south of the Parkway is planned to be open space, and a lot, even though it can be farmed, there are a lot of wetland and other areas more to the south that are probably where you're going to see a lot of the bird habitat end up. I know that that's come up. Anytime you have farms, you get geese out in there. If you've got corn, if you've got any, ponding, anything like that, you're going to get birds out there. So I don't think we've done anything to, as a city, to identify areas for protection that way.
Okay, thank you. And what about the flooding that people say Osprey has had?
I've checked with their building inspectors. They are not aware of that. They have not heard of that. I don't have a good answer for you there. Back in '83, over to the east here along Lakewood Drive, some of the homes did have sump pumps that went on. Other ones didn't. They were built up a little bit of elevation. Their elevation was actually below what is required now, what they had to have at the time. I believe it was 4487, if I'm not mistaken, where ours is like 4496 now. And so even at the '83 flooding, these homes, none of them had damage from that water. Some homes had some minor damage further up. So it would surprise me that Osprey would have water damage because they're built above that elevation. I'm not sure what it would come from, unless,
thank you.
On site.
Any other questions for Mr. Maxfield?
I have some.
Ms. Jensen?
I just wanted a clarification on a few things. The item description for this agenda item says that we're considering a rezoning, but in the recommendation from staff, it says approving a subdivision also. So are we doing both of those things tonight as we address this?
Yes, when Provo varies, usually there's a concept plan that's part of that. Technically, the Planning Commission is only the one acting on that, although it does get forwarded on the City Council and they take that into account when they rezone areas. But for rezonings, we do require concept plans.
Is that a clear? I always am worried that the public thinks, well, they weren't talking about the subdivision, so I didn't need to input on this, when in fact, because the agenda item doesn't actually state that.
Yeah, and this one actually has more input than otherwise because preliminary and final subdivision plans are not public hearings. They are by right development in Provo. And so this actually gives an opportunity for more comment, through the concept plans we would have otherwise.
Okay. And was there in fact no neighborhood meeting held? And is that something we should worry about?
There have been previous neighborhood meetings held on the project. Herons Landing has existed for like 3 years, somewhere in that area. Again, a lot of it's held up because of the sewer issues. And they had some prior public hearings. I think probably the applicant and the neighborhood chair can speak to that. I think the neighborhood chair did desire to have another meeting. The applicant through misunderstanding, well, I'll let him address why they didn't do that.
So it's been heard twice before. Was it approved, denied, or continued at that time? Or was it just he didn't move forward?
Yeah, what we try and do with neighborhood meetings is get comments and input. It shouldn't really be a vote, a yay or nay. It's like, here are the things we look at. Oh, let's see, Bill has something.
There were 2 previous neighborhood meetings on this. This has never been to the Planning Commission because of the sewer issue. It's always been held up, right?
Oh, yeah.
This has never been to Planning Commission.
I'm sorry.
That was my question. I thought maybe there were some reasons that it had been continued.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Bill.
And I believe, from some of those neighborhood meetings, I think there were some revisions. Again, I'll let the applicant speak to that.
I had one more question. I noticed there's the large lot in the middle that's surrounded by the other subdivision lots. That's the owner's property. Right. Is there any concern with leaving that as it is? I think it's kind of nice. It gives it a little agricultural feel to have that nestled in the middle. But if they develop it in the future, when somebody decides to sell that giant parcel, there's no access to the other sides of it. So either you end up with a giant flag lot if they want to subdivide it, or it can never be developed.
Yeah, you would have to probably run a lane down or something that's on its own. We had looked at a number of situations where we could run one of the roads against that property to give it a little more accessibility, but it just became somewhat problematic because of the gridded street system through that area where you're trying to align with the streets on the north as well as to the east.
Right.
if you can see the one on the west, there wasn't enough depth to run
Some of
that
those
street further out. There was some discussion, do you run another one back through here? It also, and this comes down to some philosophical end, because the more streets we run, the more accessible the area is. But because we're doing a net density, it really penalizes the developer. And so by making a better connectivity in the subdivision, you penalize them by taking away lots. And so we tried to work it out so that we could get enough to make it work without overdoing it. If that makes sense.
Is it realistic to just point that out to the developer and say
Yes.
to plan right now with like 3 driveways coming in from one of those roads, so that if there was some development, you wouldn't have to have something undesirable all coming from 1560 or whatever that street is on the north that I can't read?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, we will certainly do that.
Because I know that's just like a supposed problem that we could have, but it seems like we can do it right by assuming that at some point they'll want to infill that, and let's do it in the way with the best accessibility.
Right. And we did try to spread, accessibility out instead of having 1 or 2 streets. That's one reason, well, a couple of reasons we had it stubbed to the west, because this could eventually tie 1100, so everybody doesn't have to go up to 1560 to get out that way. But it also gives accessibility more to that property to the west, which right now there's not really a plan. There's several things that could become depending on how the area eventually develops.
Right. Yeah, I like the roads the way they are. I was just concerned about what to do with that big lot in the middle.
Yeah, and we played with the southern block too, because you notice how shallow that is with just a couple of lots. And so, yeah.
This is probably the 4th or 5th design on this property. And this design is actually one that was done by Austin Corey, a staff member who was a landscape architect, who suggested that this would probably be the best layout for getting rid of cul-de-sacs, connectivity to other properties, and trying to follow some type of grid pattern.
Nice. It looks like a nice neighborhood. Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners, for Mr. Maxfield? All right, if there are none, I will then invite Mr. Ensign to present his project.
Okay, thank you. Good to be with you all this evening. It just feels appropriate that maybe we make one change and to just keep the planner speak up to VVLDR, a very, very low density with this new layout that we're proposing tonight. So it's exciting to be here with you guys. It has been a long time in the works to get here. Thank you, Bill, for mentioning that. There has been many iterations of this, and certainly tried to contemplate all the impacts from all the various properties, understanding how it would influence each one. It initially was the sewer, and then we kind of felt like the sewer actually had some light or solution, and then ultimately the Southwest general plan came to light more, I guess, rose to the item that would not necessarily delay us, but needed to be factored in at a greater view so that this could be better understood. Because as we were proposing this, I think people wanted to just understand the entire thing. So that was a good experience to go through and kind of see that, which if I may comment, I thought that the Southwest plan turned out so good when you looked at it compared to the rest of Provo. With how much green space and how well that was put together, I think that was just a unique opportunity to plan that ahead of time and have that layout as it has. So now that we've worked through that and worked through sewer, and again, we appreciate that step as well, that phasing that capacity into blocks of 40, I think helped this project and others. After that, we spent a lot of time with the engineers working through slope of the storm and sewer. We spent a lot of time trying to lay that out the best we could, and it is a challenging site for that. Hence the 5 feet lift there on the south and west kind of portions of the project there. There was, just from a little bit of timeline, I think the sellers in this situation have really been kind of prompted by Lakeview. You know, it did create a significant impact on their properties and how they used to use them, to how they could use them. And I think that's kind of what prompted this. We are grateful that we've been able to arrive at this portion now. And again, I think that Southwest plan is just, you know, we proposed the 4 units per acre consistent with Osprey's development and everything to the north of us. Ultimately, this net, which is something I've actually never seen or done before, but I think it turned out great. And so I think we've aligned with that well. And then last, if I can just speak to the neighborhood meetings, I think initially, I think a lot of people turned up concerned and, you know, having trepidation with what would happen here. Ultimately, I don't know if it was our project, but again, the Southwest plan, I attended one of the meetings with all the large landowners, and I think collectively there was almost a unanimous, consensus that they wanted to continue farming or have the right to develop in the future. And I think that kind of made sense for the entire location and kind of solidified or crystallized what we were able to do. So we made those adjustments. This contemplates all of the Southwest General Plan. We have had this application open for 2 years. We've actually had 3 meetings, 2 at the elementary there and 1 at the Provo Rec Center. A lot of their feedback shaped how this site would work. We've had Becky's been very, very just involved and engaged. She's given a lot of feedback and direction. Ultimately, again, I think the West Side Plan has given this the direction and the solution to many of the concerns that I think many of the neighborhood residences were feeling, where they were all able to contribute at those meetings and help this come to light a little bit. So, that's kind of a brief overview of everything. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Anson. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Anson? I'm not seeing any questions from the commissioners. So thank you, Mr. Anson. I'm going to open it up to public comment now. And if we have the neighborhood chair for the Lakewood neighborhood, or any comments submitted from the Lakewood chair.
You should have received comments that she'd sent in, kind of summarizing some of those past meetings. Hopefully you got those.
Yes, we did.
Oh, hello? Caller 195, go ahead.
Hi, this is Becky, the neighborhood chair. We did not have a neighborhood meeting on this, and we haven't had one in 2.5 years. I have not been contacted since the developer submitted in March for a neighborhood meeting. I think that would help to have a neighborhood meeting so that the residents can have questions and things with all of the comments that you have gotten. I think it would be a really good thing to have. Most of the comments that I have heard have to do with the leapfrogging issue. This one was heard by Planning Commission back in 2017, but it wasn't heard by council. It was presented in the work meeting where it was discussed as a leapfrogging issue. But like the farmers, the 3 farms to the east and the 2 farms to the west, they have concerns on what this means for their property because we are taking the sewer back and around. I'm hearing it's a temporary sewer connection. Some of the residents feel like it's just kind of a weird development sequence where it's kind of hopping over that farm and then there's really nothing with that 1 acre piece. And then also how the amount of fill dirt that's brought in, you'll have those 2 high points and then those low points in the middle. So is there any questions for me?
Commissioners, any questions for the neighborhood chair? I don't see any questions for you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the community who have called in or written to comment other than what we received earlier?
Haven't received any yet, but let's give it about 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Here we go. We just received one. This is from Pam Argyle of Provo. And so she says, has a current traffic study been done on 1560 South after the development of Osprey Point?
Got David Day online if you.
We'll wait until the public comments are
Okay.
over and then ask you all to respond. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other call-ins or any other written comments, so it looks like that's all we have right now from the public.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Law. All right, and I will close item 5 to public comment at this time, and I'll turn it back to the applicant, Mr. Ensign, to respond to any of those questions or concerns that he heard. One about leapfrog development and maybe the elevation changes, and I'll ask Public Works to respond to the traffic study.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear on the leapfrog. I think by definition, I think leapfrog development is a different, that would mean we'd put out infrastructure beyond what's already there to then put some kind of use. But we've got infrastructure on all 4 sides of us. So I realize that there is a gap between Osprey and Herons Landing. Those were not interested sellers. They are functioning and love their homes. We did approach. They were not interested, and that was that. Again, by definition, we have neighbors to the north, directly to the north, and so I'm just a little confused by the leapfrog component of that. I think that if anything, this lines up with the general plan at this point, and at some point, those 3 parcels will most likely make a decision when they're ready.
Would you like to respond to the comment about a request for a neighborhood meeting?
Yeah, you know, we've had an application open for 2 years. We've had three meetings. I guess we felt like we had done a good job at doing that. We have reduced. I think our initial plans were in the 70 lot range, and we are down to the 55. And I guess we felt like we had checked the box and done a good job being involved with the community.
All right, commissioners, any other questions for Mr. Ensign?
Ms. Jensen, may I address the leapfrog issue?
Yes, please.
So staff didn't consider this to be leapfrog development for a couple of reasons. Number one, look at the land pattern, development pattern to the north. That's R1A zoning to the north. So it's adjacent to development. And the fear we have in calling this leapfrog development is if you do, what you're essentially doing, if you do that, you're essentially saying that this property owner could hold all of these property owners kind of hostage by not allowing any of that to develop until this develops. So we just would be very cautious about making a finding like that because of what it can do to take away property rights from people who would like to move forward with development now versus neighbors who don't want to move forward now.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Excuse me, Ms. Jensen, there was a second part to the public comment that I failed to read. So again, it's Pam Argyle of Provo. The first part of the comment was, has a current traffic study been done on 1560 South after the development of Osprey Point? And then the second part of the comment was, with the zone change, would this lock the developer into 4 per acre? Okay, and that's it for public comment.
Great, thank you. Mr. Pepperoni, did you want to address
Yes.
the density of development?
Yes, so it would lock them into 4 units per acre as a net calculation. So you subtract out for the land for roads, and the remaining acreage is multiplied by 4. That's why they're down to the 55 lots now versus what they had some time ago. And then also on the sewer question or sewer issue, yes, this red line that I'm pointing to on the screen, that is the sewer alignment, because it's been my understanding that these property owners weren't favorable to allowing the sewer line to come through here. That's obviously would be the optimal way to go through. There's sewer in the Osprey subdivision in this road now, but we can't force those property owners to do that. So this was the solution.
Great, thank you. Mr. Day, did you want to address the issue of the traffic study since Osprey was developed?
Yes. I'm not aware of any traffic study that's been done on 1560 South in the recent time. So any development over 10 lots like this one is will need to have a traffic study, but we haven't normally required that prior to a zone change. We'll look at that as part of the final approvals and try to identify any problems that are exposed. But as this is gridded appropriately, we really don't see any problem with the capacity on the surrounding roads. So we're not anticipating anything from a traffic study that would say, hey, there's a problem here.
Great, thank you. All right, I will turn it back. Yes. Hello? All right, I will turn the hearing back over to the commissioners for further discussion. Any questions, etc. Commissioners?
This is Commissioner Urquiaga, and I didn't understand what the one commenter meant about 2 higher points and then a lower point in the middle as far as elevation goes. I don't know if that would be the city or the developer that would know the answer to that.
I was a little uncertain on that comment as well.
It could be that sometimes the homes are higher than some of the yard. They're required to retain runoff on their property. So that could also, cause drainage problems if, I don't know how to say that, but if they build up the ground so their home stood up, but then the yards drop down. A lot of homes on Lakewood Drive, for instance, have some of that feature. You can see some of the existing ones, but is that what we're thinking? I don't know if that's what it means or not.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, Brian, this because of that lowest level of habitation, because of this area, our layout will be very similar to what you see at Osprey. They're technically not a basement. We call them daylight basements, but it is kind of a lifted, exactly what's been done over there is what we'll be dealing with here as well. as I believe you, Commissioner or Gagi. Did I say that right? Close? Hopefully.
Urquiaga, but
Urquiaga. Okay. This slide, it does slope a bit, so it's mostly that south and west portion there that we are going to have a bit of fill and engineering those homes so that they're done properly.
okay.
Any other comments, commissioners, or questions?
I do.
Thoughts?
I understood the comment to be that the southern end of Herons Landing and the southern end of Osprey both would have to have fill to bring them up to grade. And so as a result of that, it'll be like they're built on a berm and that remaining agricultural land in the middle will be in a trough. And so that could create drainage issues, even though they're required to drain onto their own property.
Yeah, if you go out there now, you'll see the left side of Osprey, which was kind of the dike that was put in. There is a drop off down to that farmland. I think in this case, they would still again be required to retain it. I don't know if the farmers would love to have the runoff. I'm not sure. But yeah, so they'd have to deal with that as the subdivision develops. But there would be a visual drop off.
We've actually talked about that as a staff, that change in elevation here has got to be paid very careful attention to on the next subdivision plat approval, because we did have some problems with that when Osprey was built. So we've already talked about that as a staff with engineering to watch out for that issue along this border.
Because it's water, so you can ask them to retain it, but that just means the dirt won't go into the farmer's field, but the water is still going to go to the lowest point and it's going to seep into his land.
You have to keep your water on your lot, and that's what we will have them do.
Okay.
I think Osprey built a retaining wall along their east side because of that situation.
Well, it seems like this development is in comports with the general plan and has gone over years of manipulation to bring it in conformity with the general plan.
I think it's also addressing the Southwest Neighborhood Plan and the desire that was expressed through that for 4 units per acre net. It's a connected grid of streets. We've seen some proposals come for the west side that were a collection of cul-de-sacs, which we don't want to see. So I think it's a nice layout actually to the subdivision.
The only concern I had with the layout was if that lot in the middle doesn't get developed, like the picture here supposes it might, then the only access that you have to this subdivision is onto 1560. Is that going to cause a problem? We've got this, this road and you're filtering 55 cars out in 2 driveways. Is that a safety issue, an engineering issue? Any of the above?
I address that if you'd like.
Please.
So those 2 points of access would support over 1,000 cars, and we're not going to see that many out of this subdivision. Okay. So I think that with 2 points of access onto 1560, which is a collector road, is a pretty common thing.
Is that pink line down at the bottom temporary road access to connect the two, or is that something else?
That pink is the sewer. So the sewer goes out down their property line, out into Lakeview Parkway right away, over to Osprey Townhomes property, and through Osprey Townhomes into the sewer in Osprey Subdivision.
Okay.
So it's just a routing around the private property.
Excellent. I had another comment for commissioners to discuss.
Please.
We saw in the neighborhood feedback that we received through the emails that there's a lot of people who feel like agriculture should stay agricultural, or that this isn't compatible with the character of the area. And I know that it's in the general plan to be residential, but we recently heard another project in the north part of Provo that was an agricultural property that was in the general plan to be residential, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe this is just something for us to discuss as we weigh this concept of if an agricultural property is unlikely to ever be used as agriculture again, because the current owners aren't planning to use it as such, and it's designated residential in the general plan, how do we determine when or if to rezone it? Or why wouldn't we just say that that's a compliance? I don't know if anyone has an opinion on that.
I think one of the things, it's been at least 2 years ago, I believe, the Southwest Neighborhood Plan was developed, and those agricultural landowners were part of that process. They were involved throughout, and many of them did not want to remain agricultural, citing things like water issues. They didn't have any family members that wanted to take over the family farm. They wanted to be able to develop their property in future. And some wanted to remain agricultural. And I think what you're seeing here with the parcel in between Osprey and Heron, and then the additional vacant land to the west, are those homeowners or those property owners who either are continuing to farm or are not yet interested in developing. But those agricultural uses were debated pretty thoroughly, and I think Mr. Pepperoni could speak to that as well.
Yeah, Mr. Knudsen had a clarification there. Why don't you go ahead, Robert?
Yeah, that really is an agricultural ground. What it really is pasture ground. If you drive down there, you'll notice that they have cattle grazing on it. So they really don't actively farm it for the most part. It's just ground that's used for pasture for cattle or for horses.
And Mr. Knudsen, you were involved in the Southwest Neighborhood Plan development, were you not?
Yes.
Yeah, Robert was, and so was Russ Phillips on the Planning Commission, and also a West Side property owner.
Right.
I just feel like I know that there's people who want to develop their land, and unless there's a trajectory that shows that that's what's going to happen, if the general plan says this is what we foresee and people have had a chance to weigh in on that, then I don't see why it doesn't make sense to fill in these unused areas with desirable residential that meets also the general plan. This meets exactly what has been delineated verbally in the general plan. So I just wanted to throw that out there to make that comparison, that this isn't the only time we've had this discussion. And I personally feel like if it's a good land use and it meets the goals of the community, then I don't see how we can hold somebody back from doing that legally.
Right. I would tend to agree with you on that front, Ms. Jensen.
I don't think we should hold up the application. It's been at this level for quite a while. There's another bite at the apple with the city council.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
I had a few questions, just logistical questions. Sorry, I just keep talking.
It's all good. Thank you, Ms. Jensen.
At the beginning, I think it was Mr. Maxfield said that there's only 40 lots that are allowed in each phase of development. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, there are total, and I may get this number wrong, but there are like 500 total hookups available right now for sewer until they upgrade the lines. And to be equitable so that someone doesn't go and just grab all those at one time, the city set a policy that only 40 units could be platted at one time.
Okay, so we can approve a subdivision with 55 lots.
Yes.
But he can only get 40 building permits, and 20 of them have to be occupied before he can ask for the other building permits.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then the second part of this is just maybe more for the commissioners, but I worry about infilling to raise the grade of the property. And if we've already heard that Osprey had runoff, I've seen infilling done in subdivisions that weren't in a floodplain, that were on the hillside. And there's a lot of structural compromise when construction begins on extensive infill. There's poor compaction, which leads to foundations settling and cracking. Right. And if you add a floodplain to that where there's water seepage, you could have some major issues. So I don't know if that's even ours to make a comment on, but that is a concern that I have with so much infill being required, just for sure. It's not even for a view. It has to be done for drainage issues, but I worry that it's not as easy as we're making it sound.
Robert, do you want to talk about the water level out there, the water table out there?
Mr. Day, do you have any input on that?
Yes. So one of the things we look at in these areas is the stability of the ground when you're building either roads or houses on a soil like this. And routinely for earthquake protection on these type of areas, you bring in a couple feet, probably at least 2 feet of fill material to bridge over the liquefiable soils. So in a way, bringing this land up higher is actually helping make it more stable.
Regardless of what the fill material is, just getting it out of that water table area?
Bringing it up, normally the fill material that's brought in is normally about twice the quality of what's existing there. So if you were to dig it down in this area, you would find probably a real clay soft material, whereas something that would be hauled in would be a sand, rocky material that would have a lot more structural capacity than the stuff that's currently there.
Mr. Day, maybe just to the particular concern, I guess my expectation would be that before any fill is brought on the property, the existing soils are going to be studied, probably at multiple locations across the property. An engineer, probably somebody with some kind of geotechnical expertise, is going to very, very explicitly define if, for example, maybe any existing material needs to be removed because it lacks structural integrity before fill's brought to the property. And then they also would define, usually I think within pretty tight parameters, exactly what type of material would be acceptable to use as fill material and how that's brought in terms of lifts, that is just the depth of material that's brought in before it's compacted and different things like that, to result in what Mr. Day just described, which at the end of the day typically is effectively a bridge over the existing site to make it more stable, to have more strength and integrity than what was there before. But we're not talking about a random process. I think probably city inspectors or somebody else is on site all the time while the fill material is being brought in. They're testing and different things of that nature. Is that fair to say, Dave?
Yeah, that's all correct. Normally an 8-inch lift, we do a test on it, and then we bring 8 inches more in. You're compacting stuff normally to 95% of the maximum ability to compact the material, where the existing materials will probably be around 80%. So, and at that point, you're compacting soil against looser soil. It becomes a little bit of a trick to get it all in right. But yeah, you're right. We have pretty strict standards for the fill material, especially in the roadways. It's like twice the quality of the material that would be in under the homes. So, because they have to hold heavier loads.
I think those processes, frankly, are the result of failures that have happened over, decades of experience and that type of thing. That's the origin of the kind of the rules that are in place to try to.
So maybe
not allow
I'm
that to
basing my
happen.
opinion on what they learned from.
I'm sorry.
Maybe I'm basing my opinion on the projects that they learned these things from.
If there have been failures, I think somebody learned probably the hard way from those.
Yeah, if we have a failure, we end up paying to fix it. So we do not want a failure.
Any other questions, Mr.
Responsibility.
Tiaga?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is it the responsibility of the developer or of the city to make sure that those lots are adequately supported?
So the developer builds it as our city staff watches them and inspects it. Once it's completed and all done, then we do a final inspection on it and say, okay, we accept it because we've watched it and we know that it's done correctly. Now the city will take over responsibility of the roadways. The lots would be private property, but we would have had the same level of inspection on those.
There's usually a bond involved.
Yeah, there's a rather large bond.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe just for instance, I think we're about $2.5 million bond on Osprey. So as they get work done, we release that money back to them. And we don't give that money back to them until we're satisfied that it's done correctly.
And even there's usually like a 1-year warranty period, right, Dave? So that you can observe if there are any clear defects through that period of time and that sort of a thing. It's not a perfect system, and I don't think it's an absolute guarantee, but I think it certainly provides a measure of protection that is warranted and appropriate, in my opinion.
Good discussion, commissioners. I think I've learned something tonight.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Mr. Howard?
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation for a zone change for residential agricultural and A15 to R17 for property located at approximately 901 West, 1560 South in the Lakewood neighborhood, and also forward a positive recommendation for the associated concept plan for the subdivision.
That's actually your approval rather than a recommendation.
Oh, well then, okay. Well then, do we need a separate vote for that?
I believe we can include it all in the same motion.
All right, well, I recommend we approve the concept plan.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Do we have a second for Mr. Howard's motion on item 5?
I have a clarifying question.
Please.
Before we second or vote, are we okay with the concerns from the neighborhood that they hadn't been heard, that they feel like there needs to be a neighborhood meeting? I feel like he has had neighborhood meetings and his plans have only improved since then. So the only thing that's changed is the other development around him. But I just didn't know if we had fully nixed that as a concern to worry about.
I think it's worth talking about, but in my opinion, I think this is the best project that somebody could expect to get in terms of how it's designed. and what the final product will be and how that will have a positive impact on the neighborhood. So I mean, I add that in addition to just my awareness of different discussions that have gone on over the years relative to this property and its development, that type of a thing. I don't necessarily think another neighborhood level discussion would yield any beneficial changes to what we're talking about tonight.
I agree with you too. I just wanted to make sure we addressed it.
I think that's good that we talked about it. Sure.
Right. And I was basing my questions about the elevation and the water on the letters that we did receive. I think the members of the commission have reviewed those and asked questions for the neighborhood. So I'm satisfied that the water and the sewer and the infill will be addressing the concerns that the neighborhood had. And I especially as the development is going to take some time, there will be an opportunity for members of the community to bring problems to our attention if that happens, or to the attention of the city.
I agree.
So having said all that, are we ready for a second to Mr. Howard's motion on item 5?
I will happily second his motion.
You got 2 to pick from.
I have 2 here. I heard Mr. Knudsen.
Yes, I'll second.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Knudsen. All those in favor of forwarding positive approval on item 5 with an approval for the subdivision concept plan subject to the proposed rezoning. And I'll read through the roll call again. Ms. Jensen?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Knudsen?
Aye.
Ms. Urquiaga?
Aye.
Mr. Howard?
Aye.
And myself, Ms. Jensen, aye. So that's unanimous, and we'll forward a positive recommendation to Municipal Council for item 5, along with an approval of the subdivision concept plan subject to Municipal Council approval of item 5. All right.
Thank you. I appreciate the time tonight. I know we got a lot to do, but we appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Do we have a motion to adjourn this evening?
I'll make a motion. I'm not going to be shy.
Motion to adjourn by Ms. Jensen. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Seconded by Ms. Urquiaga. All those in favor of?
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
I'll drink to that. See you later.
Thanks very much, commissioners. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.